Shall I soundproof or shall I move? If you've ever been frustrated with noise from neighbours, getting stressed and annoyed because you're hearing that neighbour's TV, dog barking, hearing conversation and doors banging, then in this video we're going to go through what you need to do to soundproof your home. We're going to go through different property types, going to go through 1930s, 1950s, 1960s type property. We're even going to look at detached properties for road traffic noise too. So if you've ever been frustrated with noise, this is a video for you. Hopefully by the end of this video it will give you some direction to tell you whether you're soundproofing or moving. The first property we're going to look at is a 1930s terrace style property. Now these types of properties, space is normally at a bit of a premium, and sometimes you can hear noise from neighbours on both sides, but it's normally fairly straightforward to get at least a 65% human perceived reduction in airborne noise from neighbours on this type of property. Now the really good thing about these properties is flanking noise transmission is normally quite minimal. So you're only going to hear a slight bit of noise on those window walls, those other walls perpendicular to the separating party wall. Next time you hear the neighbour's TV, put your finger in your ear and listen on that window wall, that exterior wall. Maybe listen on the chimney stack as well. What do you hear? Do you hear the neighbour noise on those flanking areas? Now what we find with this particular type of age property, if as long as it hasn't been renovated with plasterboard, the flanking noise transmission is normally quite minimal, so therefore it can be very soundproofable to install something to those alcoves either side of the chimney stack, the fire back, tucking the system up into the ceiling and down below the floor height. So to achieve that 65% human perceived reduction in airborne noise on this particular type of property, you could get away with a 50mm system installed to both separating party walls each side. Now when it comes to soundproofing these old properties, it's very common to find holes in the structure. That's clear, great big holes going through to next door. So if you're hearing TV very clearly, or you can make out words from the neighbours, or maybe hear the neighbours on the FaceTime, you can hear the person they're speaking to, then that would signal high frequency noise coming through, and that would signal you having holes in the structure. Now where would you find those holes? You would find the holes in the suspended floor void or above the ceiling, so above those lava and plaster ceilings. And what I say on all of my videos, it's a maxim here that we always say, is to tuck it up and tuck it down. You have to cut open that floor, cut open that ceiling, tuck the system down. And you're cutting open the floor to, number one, to check for those holes in the structure. And you're cutting open the ceiling to check for those holes in the structure. But most importantly, to tuck that system up to reduce that noise coming down at an angle and reduce that noise flanking coming under any wall system you install to the direct noise path. When you're soundproofing the bedrooms in these old properties, it's good to install a 50mm system to one side and then maybe 50mm system to the other side, giving you at least a 65% human perceived reduction in airborne noise, tucking the system up and tucking the system down. Now when you soundproof the bedroom, you often have to do the loft as well, and that means installing rock wool to the loft and the gable wall, making sure you don't block up any eave sections and making sure there's got plenty of airflow. If you have a loft room, then what I would recommend is make sure you remove any plasterboard on the direct noise path, the separating party wall up in the loft, because if you left that plasterboard in place in the loft, sound would resonate and come back down to that room that you're trying to soundproof. If you have a stairwell wall on these 1930s terrace properties, then the 50mm system is a really good system for you. It only takes up 50mm space loss. We show you exactly how to do that on the noise-free DIY soundproofing course. In fact, if you are a DIYer and you have this type of property, the noise-free DIY soundproofing course is absolutely perfect for you. The first step would be to join me on the free masterclass. So get a place on the free masterclass. It's about an hour, and then maybe consider booking a call or jumping on the noise-free DIY soundproofing course. The next property I want to talk about is the 1950s semi-detached property with a concrete floor. So these types of properties are sometimes ex-council house properties, and these are very soundproofable. A lot of the noise that comes through is airborne and impact sound. When you have that concrete floor, that concrete structure there, sometimes these properties suffer from a lot of door banging, washing machine, that type of vibration coming through. Now, you can achieve a 70-80% human perceived reduction in neighbour noise on these types of properties, but you do need to treat those flanking walls. And what I mean by that is those walls perpendicular, those window walls which are coming off of the separating party wall, and those other walls that separate rooms, like the wall separating the front and back bedroom. Those walls need to have sound insulation installed to them as well as the ceilings, adding mass to the ceilings. Now, with the concrete floor on the ground floor, I would recommend something like a carpet, a heavy duty underlay, just to take the edge off some of the vibration noise that's coming through that concrete. And sometimes the ceilings, if you've got vibrational noise, maybe you're in the lounge and you're trying to watch a TV or something, and there's kids in the room diagonally above making noise, and that noise is coming down at an angle and disturbing your evening, then you do need to put quite a considerable system to that lounge ceiling to reduce that noise coming down at an angle. So there is a lot of work to soundproof these properties, but they are very soundproofable. So if you do put the work in, you will get a good result. So it's worth noting that after you treat all of those flanking areas with the systems that we show on the noise-free DIY soundproofing course and soundproofing for beginners and a lot of my other videos, you do get a really good reduction in noise. But sometimes things like doors banging and vibrational noise will still come through, and that's often because of that concrete slab, that vibration's coming through. You still might feel that vibration after all of that soundproofing has been installed to all of those areas. Now, one thing to note with this particular type of property is they often have bay windows, and those bay windows often have an RSJ, a rolled steel joist, and that is an area where sound can be channeled from that separating party wall along that exterior window wall. And you can find this out for yourself next time your neighbours are making noise, or next time that dog's barking. Put your finger in your ear and listen on that bay window wall, that exterior wall. What are you hearing? If you're hearing the noise down that window wall, then that would need to be treated. Often with this type of property, this 1950s semi, we often have to sound deaden that RSJ, insulate the web of the steel, treat that bay window ceiling, and then all the sound insulation that we install to the window wall has to be returned into the window. And the good thing about this is it improves the acoustic value of the window and the thermal value of the window as well. So you're less likely to hear noise from outside coming in through the window when you return the soundproofing into the window frame in this way. To soundproof one room in this type of age property, it costs £10,000 to £15,000 to have it all done for you, and that depends on the amount of noise paths that you treat, the severity of the noise problem, how thick the sound insulation is, and the quality of the materials that you decide to use. If you're a DIYer and you follow the 4-step soundproofing method on the noise-free DIY soundproofing course, then you could be looking £4,000 to £5,000 per room if you're a DIY and you could do it all yourself. And that should give you a 70 to 80% reduction on that airborne noise, a 65% human perceived reduction on that impact noise. So what does that mean? You're unlikely to hear that airborne noise come through from the neighbours again, but some of the impact noise will be, it will sound like it's a bit more of a distant thud. If someone's slamming doors or stomping up and down the stairs next door, the neighbours are making that type of noise, that will sound a lot more distant. A door bang would sound like, oh, is that outside? So you're unlikely to hear that over maybe a TV. If you've got your TV playing, you're unlikely to hear those thunts and bangs come over the TV noise. Whereas at the moment, if you're without sound insulation, you're probably hearing that over the TV. It's disturbing you and disturbing your evening. Now, the 1950s semi-detached property with a wooden joist construction. So these types of properties, they have the vents out the front, so that signals a suspended floor. So if you walk into your lounge or your downstairs rooms, it will feel like a bit of a drum because you have that suspended floor beneath your feet. Now, these good old 1950s properties, they are very soundproofable. It is a lot of work to soundproof them, and you will need the soundproofing education course or the noise-free DIY soundproofing course to help you and guide you along. Use the step-by-step installation videos on all of the different noise paths of these properties. They have a lot of noise paths, but they're very soundproofable. Believe me, I know, I live in a 1950s semi-detached property, and you can achieve a significant reduction in noise. You can achieve that soundproofing of a detached house with one of these properties, but it is a lot of work. Now, how is that different to the other 1950s with the concrete floor? Well, because you have the suspended floor joist on the ground floor, you can joist disconnect. So you can disconnect your floor from the structure, which means you can take out some of those impact noise, that vibration of washing machine, kids hitting a ball against the wall and kids running up and down the stairs. That noise can be significantly reduced because you can disconnect the joist with this type of age property. It's just not practical to do that in the 1950s with the concrete floor. Now, to soundproof one of these properties can cost £15,000 to £25,000 to have it all done for you just to treat one room. If you're a DIYer, then it's going to cost more like £3,000 to £6,000, depending on the amount of noise paths you treat and the sort of higher quality soundproofing materials that you decide to use. Some of these properties have the lounge diner knocked into one big room, and those rooms alone, as you've seen from my other videos, can be £35,000 to £40,000 to soundproof that one room to have it all done for you. One key thing to note with this particular type of property, the 1950s property with that suspended floor void, you do need to treat all of those flanking areas. If you decide to fall into the trap of just soundproofing the alcoves either side of the chimney stack in every room that has a separating party wall, maybe putting something around the chimney stack as well, then to the floor, to the ceiling, then you're unlikely to get more than a 50% human perceived reduction in airborne noise. To get that significant reduction in noise, to feel like you're comfortable in your home, feel settled in your home, feeling like you don't ever want to move, you do need to treat those flanking areas and that suspended floor void, and potentially looking at joist disconnection if you have impact noise coming through. It's just what we find from soundproofing hundreds of this particular type of property. I also live in this particular age property, and I gutted my lounge 3 times, and I did fall into that trap when I first renovated my lounge for the first time. So yeah, just to note, with that particular age property, treat all of those areas that you can, and you can get that soundproofing of a detached house. The next property I want to look at is the 1960s type property that has the dormer windows above. So these types of semi-detached properties are very difficult to soundproof. I've actually done a complete video on this particular type of property. If you live in one of these particular types of property, have a look at that video. I find that these properties are very difficult to soundproof because of the way that they're constructed. These dormer windows that sit in the roof void that create that room upstairs, often there is a supporting timber joist, or sometimes a rolled steel joist, an RSJ, which those dormer windows sit on. So they sit across that separating party wall. And even if they don't, sometimes they're very close or butt up to one another as well. Now, to get to those supporting joists, to sound deaden them, it normally involves a lot of disruption. You're pulling down ceilings and pulling down a lot of walls to get to those supporting joists to sound deaden them. And often as well, these types of property, the way that they're constructed and they're built together, there's often a lot of holes going through to next door as well. And to get to those holes in the structure, again, often involves a lot of disruption. There's a lot of areas, a lot of noise paths that need to be treated just to soundproof that lounge downstairs, for example. Now, before you even start soundproofing the internal walls of, say, the lounge, there are a lot of areas such as the shared roof at the top. If you look, a lot of them have these dormer windows and there's a shared roof, so there's noise transfer on the roof, there's noise transfer on the cladding, and often the dormer windows don't leave much space available to install sound insulation to that separating party wall, or that dormer cheek, that dormer window which backs onto the neighbour's bedroom. But one of the key issues with this particular type of property is often they have what's called dwarf walls, which are little stud walls which go from the window sill on these dormer windows, and they go all the way down to the bedroom floor, or which is actually the lounge ceiling. And when you're in the lounge ceiling and you see where those dwarf walls sit, they're often in the middle of that lounge ceiling. and they're connected to the separating party wall. So they're like putting a big amplifier to that separating party wall, channeling the noise from the wall down through your lounge ceiling. This particular type of property, it has so many noise paths, it's normally not feasible to soundproof this particular type of property. If you have one of these types of property and you have the suspended floor, you've got the similar cost to the 1950s semi-detached property, that's 15 to 25k to do one room. Plus, you've got all the extra costs it takes to sound deaden those supporting joists and dormer walls, which is a lot of noise paths above that room that you're trying to soundproof, where sound can resonate and shoot back down into that lounge, that room that you're trying to soundproof. So therefore, it can be very costly to soundproof. If you do have one of these particular type of properties, then I would say definitely DIY is the way forward. Maybe consider the noise-free DIY soundproofing course. Learn about all the different noise paths. Test your own home. Put your finger in the ear and test those different noise paths that you've learned on the online course, and maybe consider taking out different noise paths, getting more and more reduction in noise as you go, rather than trying to soundproof the whole house and be disappointed with the result. The next property I want to look at is a 1960s to 70s type semi-property. This particular property is very soundproofable, but often it doesn't have the space available. Often the windows go right up to that separating party wall, leaving you only maybe 50mm, 2 inches of space available to soundproof. And that might not be the case in every room, but often the main bedroom or the lounge only has a small amount of area where you can apply sound insulation to that separating party wall. So you're looking at the 50mm system like we show in Soundproofing for Beginners. That will give you a 65% human perceived reduction in airborne noise coming through. As long as you apply that to all of the different flanking areas, that can be quite transformational for you. I mean, your neighbours won't hear you if you followed that methodology, but it will give you, because you only have 50mm space available, impact noise, low frequency noise, particular male's voice and loud music will still come through that type of soundproofing. If you're treating a bedroom in this particular age property, you do need to consider things like the exterior cladding. Sometimes these properties have a cladding like in form of a tile. So you have a tile, then a batten, and that hollow void sound can resonate between the two neighbouring properties. Often the loft has great big holes going through to next door. You really want to consider bricking those holes up and treating the whole of the gable wall with a rock wall. And then I would also consider insulating your entire loft with a rock wall to reduce that noise transfer coming through. Another thing to look out for with this particular type of property is the separating wall between the front and back bedroom. Often that wall is a plasterboard wall or sometimes a paramount board wall like what we have here, and the noise will resonate in this wall which is separating the front and back bedroom. So if this wall was left untreated, this sound would just transmit in this wall down to the room downstairs. Now often these types of properties, they do have that suspended floor void, and space is at a bit of a premium. So you're looking at the 95mm thick 4-inch system or maybe the 2-inch 50mm system as a solution to the direct noise path. The more noise paths you treat, the more reduction in noise you'll get. But normally the rooms for this particular type of property, they come in between £12,000 and £18,000 to have it all done for you. And the reason for that, that's not always spent in that room that you're trying to soundproof. Sometimes there's those paramount board walls or those stud walls that are in other rooms which are perpendicular, or those walls are channeling noise into that room that we're trying to soundproof. So sometimes that money is not always spent in that room that you're trying to soundproof, but you're looking at £12,000 to £18,000 per room to have it all done for you. If you live in this particular type of property, you're a builder or DIYer, then the noise-free DIY soundproofing course would be perfect for you, and you're probably looking at £4,000 to £6,000 per room, depending on how much noise paths you decide to treat and the high quality soundproofing materials that you decide to use. Often these properties are very soundproofable for airborne noise, TV, music, conversation, those types of noises. You can get a 70 to 80% reduction on those types of noises. If you have more extreme noises like dogs barking, low frequency bass noise, then sometimes these properties just don't have the space available to soundproof against those types of noises. The next property I want to look at is the 1980s semi-detached property that has concrete floors. Now, this particular type of property has a lot of flanking noise transmission, and that's because the internal walls, the blockwork, they normally have a cavity wall, and that internal block wall is a lightweight block, and therefore impact noise, structural borne noises can be quite prolific with this particular age property. Now, if you have a noise problem where the neighbours are making noise in their lounge, the other side of the wall from your lounge, it's room-to-room transfer of noise between, say, the separating party walls. So you're trying to watch your TV, the neighbours are trying to watch their TV, and you're hearing each other's TV over one another. Then they're very soundproofable from that point of view, from that soundproofing perspective, in that you can put a direct noise barrier, you can treat the flanking areas, you can treat the ceiling, potentially leaving that concrete floor. And that's for airborne noise, TV, conversation, radio, music. That can be quite transformational for someone suffering from noise from neighbours in that situation. When you have impact noise, then those noises are a lot more difficult to stop or barrier for this particular age property, and that's because of the construction techniques used and the amount of noise paths that you have to reduce that structural borne noises. The lightweight blocks, noise can transmit so easily through the lightweight blocks, and of course all the internal walls are built with these lightweight blocks. There's a lot of flanking areas that need to be treated, addressed, soundproofed as part of reducing these impact noises, and a lot of the time it's not practical to raise the floor to create floating floors in this situation. There is no joist to disconnect because you've got concrete in place. So I would say if you're suffering from impact noise, structural borne noises in this particular type of property, that's where I would potentially consider moving, because the costs of soundproofing those impact noises is far exceed the costs of moving, and also you would go into that investment with no guarantee. You could spend all of that money to try and soundproof against those impact noises, and the noise would still come through at the end. So how much does it cost to try and soundproof a room in one of these types of property? You're looking at £15,000 to £25,000 to have it, £15,000 to £25,000 to have it all done for you for this particular 1980s semi-detached property with a concrete floor. Whereas if you're a DIYer, you're probably looking at more £4,500 to say £6,500 to do it yourself, to treat all of those flanking areas. Now, why is it that much? It's because you need to sound deaden all of those lightweight block areas, otherwise the noise will still come through. You could soundproof the separating party wall in every room of your home with this particular type property and feel no change in the sound. That's because the noise is coming through the structure, more so with this 1980s semi with a concrete floor than, say, other properties like the 1930s and 1950s that we looked at earlier. And forgive me, guys, I only hear about the bad ones. These are just ones that we have soundproofed over the last 17 or so years, and I'm just sharing this with you. The costs of soundproofing, I'm fully aware that there are soundproofing material suppliers that are giving you quotes for, say, £1,500 for a party wall going to the floor, to the ceiling. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about following the 4-step soundproofing method to soundproof all of those different noise paths to get a significant reduction in noise. So we're on about sound deadening that window wall, that other wall perpendicular, the separating party wall, the ceiling, and some other hollow walls that might be in that room outside the room that we're trying to soundproof. So with a 1980 semi-detached property with a concrete floor, soundproofing is not a good investment with this particular type of property when the noise is coming diagonally down from above. Or if you are in your bedroom and you're trying to go to sleep, but the neighbours have their TV or music playing, they're down in their lounge, they've got a gathering of people, that noise is coming up at an angle. Then with this particular age property, again, you would have to sound deaden not only the walls in that room down below, but also the walls in that bedroom above, and also look at potentially floating floors as well. So there's a lot of noise paths that need to be treated, addressed for noise coming up at an angle. So therefore, I would not recommend soundproofing this particular age property for noise coming up at an angle. Also with impact noise, such as furniture moving, kids running around, kids getting a ball against the party wall. For this particular type of property, I would not try and soundproof against that. And worst one, I think, with this particular age property is when you've got kids running around, jumping around in that room diagonally above your lounge. Very difficult to soundproof against that noise with this particular age property. And the main reason for this is the lightweight materials used when this particular age property was constructed. There are different construction techniques used which seem to amplify the noise or allow the sound to channel around the house more easily, and that is the main reason. Which leads us nicely on to new build properties. Just before we look at new build properties, I thought I'd share a couple of detached properties where the homeowners are struggling with noise, and the noise problem is so bad that it is more cost effective to move rather than try and soundproof their detached property. And for those of you who have semi-detached and terraced properties thinking, oh, I just want a detached property, 40% of our inquiries come from homeowners with a detached property. They're still struggling from road traffic noise, aircraft noise. They're still unable to play their instruments whenever they want, as loud as they want, whenever they want. And then there's also the usual ones like home cinemas. They still need those rooms soundproof, whether that's room-to-room transfer of noise or neighbours hearing the cinema room. So some detached properties, I think it was in my comments on some earlier videos a few months ago, there was a homeowner in a detached property and he could hear the kids running down the alleyway between the two detached properties. He could feel the vibration in his new build detached property. Other noise problems on detached properties are kids kicking a ball against the fence, to dogs barking in the neighbour's garden. Yeah, there's lots of different things on detached properties. Internal noises such as room-to-room transfer of noise. They're in their new kitchen and they're hearing toilet noises. They can hear their guests go up the stairs and tell whether they've washed their hands or not because the room-to-room transfer of noise is so bad. So we're just going to go through a few detached properties and where the construction technique of the detached property means it's just not feasible to soundproof that detached property. So the first one we're going to look at is a property like this where the house is constructed using SIPs. And for those of you that don't know what SIPs are structurally insulated panels, and particularly the ones I'm focusing on is the ones that have a rigid insulation between the two OSB boards. So when you have a house constructed with SIPs, as in the structurally insulated panels on the walls, and then all the roof is then rigid insulation, and worst of all, they've covered it with some aluminium or some fancy cladding which is not insulated as well, the road noise is unbearable. And for those of you that know about road noise, we don't have to tell you how bad that is for your health. So yeah, sometimes when you have a detached house and it's constructed with SIPs, that's just not feasible to soundproof. I would say try and concentrate on doing one room really well, but still you're looking 30, 40, 50k to soundproof that one room because you've got so many other noise paths channeling noise into that room, as well as changing the roof construction from a warm roof to a cold roof. So any detached property built with SIPs, I would say move rather than try and attempt to soundproof it. Another situation where you have a detached property and it's just not feasible to soundproof and moving might be a better option is when you have a detached property, whatever age. It could be a 400-year-old barn conversion, it could be a modern new build detached property, or it could be something in between. When they've absolutely gutted the detached house back to brickwork, they've put new extensions and loft conversions on, and they've used those modern building techniques. They've dot and dabbed everywhere. They've built new hollow stud walls everywhere. It's all recessed downlighters everywhere. Those types of detached houses that have been modernised and renovated, just not possible to soundproof for the room-to-room transfer of noise, because the amount of disruption, the amount of renovation required in not just the room that you're trying to soundproof, that little office or that new kitchen extension or that bedroom, there's normally so many other noise paths, so many other flanking stud walls that are hollow or rigid insulation, flat roofs, which are channeling the noise into that room that you're trying to soundproof. And yeah, again, forgive me, I'm only hearing about the bad ones, but for a lot of detached properties that have been renovated in that way, not possible or not feasible to soundproof, and moving might be the better option for you. And finally, on detached properties, because I understand a lot of you watching it aren't in detached properties, would be where you have road traffic noise or aircraft noise, whether that you're living close proximity to an airport or under a flyover, or you're in close proximity to a busy road and you have a new build detached property. Again, using those modern techniques, it's just not feasible to soundproof the whole of your detached property. You're looking at doing one room really well, and yeah, you're up there in the 30 to 40k per room to soundproof that one room in your detached property. To DIY, you're probably looking at half of that figure. Alright, so I hope that helps. So let's look at new build properties. And when I say new build properties, I mean any property built in the last 30 years at the time of filming. They all have very similar construction techniques. These construction techniques are the issue. It's the hollow chipboard floors, the use of rigid insulation, the prolific use of aerated blocks, and that is all amplified by applying the dot and dab plasterboard technique to those internal walls. When you have a new build property and you're suffering from impact noise, it's just not feasible to soundproof your whole of your house. If you have an airborne noise problem from the neighbours, such as TV, conversation, music coming through, then to do one room like this lounge really well would cost around £25,000 to £30,000 to have it all done for you. For a DIY approach would be £6,000 to £10,000 or even more. And the reason for that is because that money is not all spent in that room that you're trying to soundproof. That money will be spent, yeah, of course, on that room that you're trying to soundproof, but also stairwell walls, cupboard under the stairs, those rooms above the room that you're trying to soundproof, because the noise will come through, it will resonate in those rooms above and then channel back down into that room that you're trying to soundproof. And that's why it makes a new build property very difficult and very costly to soundproof. Similar concepts apply to these new build properties as what we've just looked at in the 1980s type property. If you have impact noise of kids running around, furniture moving diagonally above the room that you're in, the room that you're trying to soundproof, for example, if the neighbours have furniture moving, doors banging in the bedroom, which is diagonally above your lounge, you're trying to be peaceful in your lounge and all you can hear is impact noise coming down at an angle, then I wouldn't try to soundproof against that noise. If that is the only noise that you're hearing, then I could potentially look at moving, because that would be a much cheaper option than trying to soundproof. In fact, I don't think it would be feasible to soundproof against that noise. And even if you did, spending £25,000 to £30,000 on that room, you still go into that investment with that risk that impact noise would still come through. And the reason for that is because there are just so many noise paths where that structural borne noise, impact noise, can get into that lounge, into that room that you're trying to soundproof. Now, my installation teams have soundproofed a lot of new build properties. We've followed the 4-step soundproofing method, soundproofing that one room really well. And the homeowners we've worked for, they no longer hear that impact noise and airborne noise in those rooms that we've soundproofed. But I would still say, with a new build property, even if you follow the 4-step soundproofing method, you must go into that soundproofing investment thinking that I may still hear the impact noise after all of this soundproofing. With a new build property, one thing I would never do is try and soundproof every wall in my new build property that has a separating party wall going to the floor, to the ceiling, leaving those hollow floor voids, leaving those hollow ceiling voids, leaving that dot and dab plasterboard on the flanking walls. That's something I would never do. What I do recommend is concentrating on doing one room really well, following the 4-step soundproofing method, trying to address all of those noise paths for noise getting into that one room and see what type of result that you get. If you still hear impact noise or airborne noise coming through and it's still making you feel a bit unsettled, uncomfortable, feeling like you want to move, then I would consider moving after that. But my opinion is it's just not feasible from a space and budget perspective to soundproof the whole of your new build property. But for a lot of homeowners that we've helped out over the years, sometimes it's just, if you soundproof one room really well, you have that room to retreat to, that room to be peaceful, then sometimes the noise in other parts of the house just isn't as irritating if you've got that one room to retreat to. And I can certainly relate to that. I have not soundproofed the whole of my house. I still have a room that I have not treated where I still hear everything from the neighbours. Shall I soundproof or shall I move? When would moving be the best option? When you've tried to soundproof one room really well, you've literally cut open the ceiling and checked for holes in the structure, and if you found them, you've bricked those holes up. You've cut open the floor, as long as it's a wooden floor, checked for those holes and bricked up those holes. You've insulated any hollow stud walls perpendicular and RSJs. Basically, you've addressed all of the main causes of the noise. You've then sound deadened the direct noise path, the separating party wall, with a sound deadening material. You've then installed a really good soundproofing system to that separating party wall, giving you a really good barrier to that direct noise path. You've also treated all of the flanking areas, that window wall, that other wall perpendicular, that ceiling, and you've followed the 4-step soundproofing method, refitting all the fixtures and fittings back in a way that doesn't compromise the new soundproofing. If you've done all of that and you're still hearing the noise from neighbours, then potentially, if it's making you feel unsettled, uncomfortable, feel like moving, then moving might be the better option for you. Another situation where you might want to consider moving is when the noise is constant and severe. Something like a dog barking, heavy bass noise, unsociable neighbours that just play low frequency bass noise, and that's out of your control, and that can come on at any time and disturb your evening or disturb your sleep. When you have like impact noise coming down at an angle, remember we talked about that earlier on in the video. When you have a noise like that and it's severe and constant, then and the costs of treating that far exceed the costs of moving, then yeah, consider moving. Another situation would be where it's just not feasible to soundproof because there's so many different noise paths where noise is getting into your property. This could be one of those old properties that we've talked about, but you've got a new kitchen extension, or like a lean-to extension off the rear of the property, maybe a new loft conversion. Those extensions and conversions have been built with modern building techniques, those materials which amplify and channel the noise around the home, and therefore it's not feasible to gut that loft conversion and change the insulation, and it's not possible to gut that new kitchen extension because that's the reason you purchased this property. This is just my opinion after soundproofing thousands of homes here in the UK over the last 17 years or so. And as I said earlier on in the video, please forgive me, I only hear about the bad ones. But hopefully all these little insights that I've shared on this video will give you some direction to whether you are moving or soundproofing. And if it's soundproofing, get in touch. I offer installation support to builders, developers, DIYers, homeowners, architects, not just here in the UK, but around the world too. I also offer consultation renovation advice to developers and builders looking to renovate homes to meet Part E building regulations. We also have online paid for educational courses. Just find the links to those in the description down below. And if you want that paid for, done for you service where you don't have to lift a finger, my installation teams offer award-winning soundproofing installation. Just get in touch on the website quietco.uk, fill out the form and we'll be in touch. That's it for now guys, I'll see you in the next video.